Welcome to this IECP seminar presenting in a short time projects we work on. Today, Philippos Agnagnostopoulos will present NUDGE. He is also coordinator of the project. Enjoy!
Thank you, Marine. So welcome everyone today, and also to those looking at the recording. I'll be very happy to present to you NUDGE. It will be a rather short presentation, and I hope everything will be nicely explained in an overview. So NUDGE stands for Nudging Consumers Towards Energy Efficiency Through Behavioral Science, and indeed it focuses a lot on behavioral sciences, and it's of course a research and innovation project. It brings together 11 very good partners from across Europe, some of which, like PGM Vavao and Inegi, are responsible for the pilots that you will see later on, while others, such as IMEC and the Athens University of Economic and Business, work more on the side of on behavioral interventions. Then also we have partners as us, as ICP, Fraunhofer, who will work also more on policy recommendations in the active citizenship network, which brings in the voice of consumers. So to dive directly into it, the grand objective of NUDGE is to systematically assess and to unleash the potential of behavioral interventions for higher energy efficiency, and also to pave the way for the generalized use of these behavioral interventions as an addition to the policy-making toolbox. Perhaps we need to discuss a bit more what we mean by behavioral interventions, and more specifically nudging. And perhaps before I mention this, it's good to have a bit of a background. So a lot of the incentives that we have been offering for energy efficiency, and even more general than energy efficiency, are usually monetary or some kind of in-kind contribution. Yet in the last 10, 15 years, there have been some very good publications showing that actually it's not necessary to provide any economic, monetary, or in-kind incentives, but rather it suffices to provide some nudges to steer behavior. So according to Thaler and Sunstein, who wrote a very impressive book in 2009, nudging is, and I read, is any aspect of the choice architecture that alters people's behavior in a predictable way without forbidding any option or significantly changing their economic incentives. And of course, you see in the table, there are a few examples. So some of those you might have seen, let's say facilitating nudges, where the preset option is the preferred one. So that doesn't allow, there's less of a tendency for the user to change the default options. Very prominent nudges are social influence nudges. So for example, when a user makes a public commitment, or when they compare their behavior, for example, their energy consumption or their installation of PV or whatever have you, compared to their neighbors. And of course, there are also other nudges, such as fear nudges, the perception of scarcity, or even deceiving nudges, which create illusions to alter perceptions and judgments. Now, and I'll mention this at the end, this is quite a sensitive topic. It involves a lot of psychology, it involves people's personal data and ethics. These have all been taken into account and are going to be briefly mentioned towards the end. So what are the main objectives of NUDGE? These are the four main ones. And again, I'll read through. The first objective is to tailor these behavioral interventions and align them with the psychological and contextual variables. All of this done through digital platforms and data analytics. That essentially means that Yes, the various psychological nudges will be offered through things like mobile apps or dashboards in which users will be able to see their consumption. So the second objective is to execute these extensive field trials where we're going to be addressing multiple instances of consumer behavior and have different mixes of either behavior-based or traditional interventions across participants of the same pilot. And here I would also like to add that this will also be compared across pilots. That moves us to objective number 3, which is the development of a research protocol that will allow us to continually measure the impact of these implemented behavioral interventions within and across pilots. And also the fourth objective, which is the main outcome of the project, which is to consolidate the findings into recommendations for policymakers and, of course, relevant stakeholders. This image shows in a very boiled down, brief way the main steps of the project. We can easily divide it into a pre-pilot phase where we have a survey to work on user profiling, and also where we design the various behavioral interventions. So these two go into the pilots, out of which we have, of course, user profiling using pilot data. So that's a second iterance of user profiling, and these two groups are different. And we also have the automated calculation and derivation of KPIs. These in turn, of course, allow us to figure out which are the best nudging interventions and use them to suggest policy recommendations. So as mentioned, Nudge will take place, we'll have actually 5 different pilots. All of these, as you see at the bottom right, use digital interfaces, which essentially allow the monitoring of energy use and the monitoring of essentially the effectiveness of behavioral interventions. And of course, these are designed in a way that will allow for a long-term behavior change. So just to briefly mention, we have them across Croatia, Greece, Germany, Portugal, and Belgium. In Croatia, we're working with energy communities for distributed self-production through photovoltaics. In Greece, we are implementing a very innovative solution for natural gas boilers. So of course, heating and domestic hot water. And here it's essentially more of a demand response approach. It's a quite an innovative approach that has received awards already. In Germany, we're working with electric vehicles, and actually the charging of those electric vehicles through photovoltaics on the user's premises. And of course, then we're using the app to find what are the most optimal times and so on. In Belgium, we're working with a school where students will be informed. They have a project-based education on energy consumption, and the idea there is that through the influence of children, their parents and their families will be implementing more energy-efficient choices. And last, but definitely not least, in Portugal, we're looking at healthy homes, and actually here we're going to be measuring energy efficiency on the multiple benefit side. So we'll be looking more at comfort and health. As you see, there is quite some diversification. Already, you saw there are 5 different member states. Their environments, of course, can be quite different, residential or in communities or in school. We work with various age groups, from young children to senior people. The different income classes and demographics. We also take into account electricity, natural gas, electricity being either from conventional sources or produced on site. And of course, we have, as I mentioned, prosumers and EVs. Now, for the pre-pilot phase, I want to mention a bit the methods we'll be using. So the most important of all is the survey-driven user profiling. We have already designed this survey. It is being translated in, I think we're at 9 languages at the moment, where we're going to be, on a voluntary basis, of course, profiling consumers across the EU, using these psychological and contextual variables. The next step is the design of the interventions. So essentially selecting which nudges we would be testing, for which we have the means to do so. And of course, they're going to be, as you read, these behavior-based interventions in combination and/or versus traditional interventions. We're starting to roll out the installation of the various monitoring and management tools. So this is mostly smart meters at the moment. We also have a number of digital interfaces. Almost all of them are pre-existing. Some are being upgraded, and one is created from scratch in order to enable the pilot participants to monitor their energy uses and us as well. And of course, all this data is collected in this central data platform, which allows for the calculation of KPIs and comparison of results across projects. Moving on to the phase during the pilots. Here we set up a very robust research protocol. We essentially have randomized control trials, having, of course, the control and the monitor groups. We're phasing in various and multiple interventions within one pilot, and of course across pilots. And again, here when we mention interventions, it's mostly behavioral, but also some traditional interventions. There's the automated monitoring of responses, and this of course feeds in very much to the KPIs. We also implement a mixed methods approach, where we will have these surveys along with field trials, assessing the effectiveness, and then essentially move to the evaluation of these behavioral changes and comparing findings within and across pilots, depending on different consumer profiles. So all of this essentially leads to the post-pilot phase, where we are drafting up some important recommendations for policymakers and relevant stakeholders. If you remember, it's one of the main objectives of NUDGE to offer policy recommendations and allow the more mass adoption of interventions for energy efficiency that do not rely on financial, for example, incentives. So that's mostly it. The last bit I want to mention is the ethics of the project, because of course we work with children, or we work with human subject, there is profiling. So in order to be as proper as we can, we have all the appropriate measures in place in terms of data protection for personal data, the various forms required of human participants. And here the most important of all is that everything is completely anonymized, and informed consent is also required before proceeding with these interventions. So this is NUDGE in a nutshell. I hope it's it was understandable. And yes, I'm open to any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippos. I don't know if you can see my screen now. I
Yes.
shared the invitation to the survey. I step in because I'm communications leader for this project to mention that the survey mentioned by Philippos to understand how people consume or save energy at home will be available from the end of February, beginning of March until the end of May 2021. And we invite you all to participate. It's basically how citizens consume energy at home, so it concerns all of us. We also have a newsletter that will come up soon, so same, I invite you to go on the website and register to it, as well as follow the project on Twitter and yeah, see more on the website, of course. Does anyone have questions for Philippos?
I think the fact that you are that the approach is using RCT, randomized controlled trial, is excellent. We definitely miss this type of rigorous evaluation for such pilot schemes, and that's typically where it's easier to use this method. Two practical questions. Maybe you mentioned that, but I missed it. Do you have an idea more or less about the size of the groups for each pilot, and the duration more or less? How much time that would last?
So the pilots will be running for about 2 years, a bit less, and the group in each pilot is 100 households. And also, by the way, I didn't mention it. When I say 2 years, this will be starting towards the end of this spring.
Thanks a lot.
So I will end this session for today. Thank you all for watching and participating, and looking forward to the next edition. Thanks, Philippos.
Thank you all. Bye. Have a good afternoon.